Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I'm here to do another author's take on video because there's a subject that's been circling around the internet recently that I think I'd like to weigh in on as a storyteller myself. And I actually think I have some qualification to talk about this because I have actually written something regarding that subject matter. And that subject is ugly characters. That seems to be the big controversy these days, especially since certain companies have started running ad campaigns where they're specifically pushing the idea of ugly characters, particularly ugly female characters, or at least not conventionally attractive female characters, into certain areas, and people are saying, what is going on here? We don't actually want to look at this stuff. We want our characters to be attractive. As you can imagine, because everything is a controversy these days, this has become a controversy as well. So what's going on here? Who's actually right? And what's the proper way to actually go about this subject? For those of you just tuning in, I'd like to explain exactly why I feel that I'm qualified to talk about this subject. Because, well, as you can tell, I'm not exactly an attractive person myself, but also I have written an unattractive character, specifically an unattractive female character, in my 3rd novel, Emerald of Maddox City. If you haven't read this yet, why not? It's available on Amazon right now. There's a link down in the description. Go get yourself a copy. It's actually very well reviewed by everyone who has read it. But I bring this up because the central character, the eponymous Emerald, is a woman who does not have conventionally good looks. In fact, she looks like a rag doll, as many people describe her. There was a period before the story, don't worry, this won't take too long, I just want to set the scene for you. Before the story, she would have been okay looking. Like, not a knockout, you wouldn't necessarily have seen her entering or winning any beauty pageants, but if you were to see her, you would have thought, yeah, I guess she's pretty. But then she suffered an accident. And that accident left her completely shattered, basically. Physically shattered. Her face and body are covered with scars and burns. Her bones were broken and didn't quite set right, which leaves her physically infirm. She can't really move all that much. That means, since she can't move, she also can't necessarily take care of herself that well, so her hair is a mess, her clothes are always rumpled and rough looking because changing is so difficult. She doesn't really change her clothes that often. And she's also got permanent black scorch marks around her left eye, which is also solid black in contrast to her normal right eye. That's from an unrelated incident, but it just completes the marred look of her appearance, if you will. And she is not easy to look at. Several characters in the story call her ugly to her face. One character takes to nicknaming her Frankenstein. You get the idea, I think. That is a character that I chose to have be the protagonist of one of my novels. And I will be bringing her back up later. But I just wanted you to know, I do have some knowledge in this field. So, with that established, let's get to the heart of the matter. First, I would like to point out the most obvious thing. There is no shortage of ugliness when it comes to fictional characters. Plenty of fictional characters throughout the whole of storytelling are considered hideous, or at the very least, not very attractive. You can go all the way back to Medusa in ancient Greece, whose looks could literally petrify people. Or you can go back even further. Set, the Egyptian god of chaos. He is so abnormal looking that his animal head, because practically all the Egyptian gods had animal heads, can't even line up with any known creature. It's simply known as the Set animal. That's how abnormal he is, and by definition, if he doesn't fit in with any known type, that's pretty weird looking. Then, of course, as you move through different eras of entertainment, you get characters like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein's monster, and then eventually you get to the realm of Dick Tracy villains, which gave way to comic book villains in general. And, well, I think you get the idea. There are a lot of not attractive characters, though you may also notice that, with the exception of Medusa, all those examples I mentioned were guys. There is a tendency for male characters to be unattractive, far more often than female characters. Some of you might hear that and immediately think double standard. Of course the men are allowed to be ugly, but the women aren't allowed to be anything other than perfectly beautiful, or else the men will reject them. Typical. But let's actually look at some of those characters, shall we? You may have actually noticed that most of the examples I gave were not good characters. They were the villains. Most of them, I mean. Like the Dick Tracy villains. I specified Dick Tracy villains specifically because the Dick Tracy comic strip was notorious for having some of the ugliest villains you'll ever see. I mean, it's amazing that the live-action movie from 1990 was able to actually adapt them and have them look halfway decent, because you wouldn't expect them to look that good in live action. You wouldn't expect it to be feasible, even. And yet, somehow they made it work. But this is largely because, for a long time, and I'm not saying this is the actual truth, but for a long time people did actually believe it, it was thought that your physical appearance did in some way or another reflect your interior, the way you were as a person. Richard III from William Shakespeare. Not the historical figure. I mean, there is some evidence to suggest he maybe wasn't a paragon of physical fitness. I believe they found his skeleton and saw some evidence of that, but in the William Shakespeare play, Richard III is hideous looking. He says he is not made for sportive tricks nor made to court an amorous looking glass. That means his face isn't very attractive. But also, he is specifically described as having a hump on his back and a withered arm. So his body is twisted in a very strange and unattractive way. And yes, his opening speech, from which that line comes, the "Now is the winter of our discontent" speech that opens the play, that does contain a few hints here and there that maybe he's leaning into villainy simply because he's been treated as a villain based on his looks. I believe the line is, "Since I cannot prove a lover to something these fair and spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days." It's been a while since I've read it, hence why I blanked on one of the words. But we have that line suggesting that he's choosing to be a villain, but at the same time, he's choosing to be a villain. Considering he's royalty and potentially in line for the throne if things go a particular way, he doesn't have to be that kind of person, but he's deliberately acting that way, well, because he's evil. There's a lot more to it than that, of course, because it's Shakespeare, it's layered. But that's the basic idea. He is physically deformed because that is a visual representation of his spiritual deformity. Then again, there are also exceptions to the rule. I mentioned Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Quasimodo is a more sympathetic character, still not very attractive. In fact, just looking at him even as an infant caused people to think he was some kind of a monster. And he even gets counted among the universal monsters sometimes. But anyone who's read the book or watched an adaptation will tell you that Quasimodo is a very sympathetic character. He is an example of the physical not reflecting the spiritual. He's strange looking, yes. His body is misshapen and his face is strange, and in some adaptations they even remember that he's deaf from being surrounded by ringing bells all day. But he's not evil. He is, in fact, very empathetic, if you will. He wants to help Esmeralda because he is taken in by her beauty. Like, she's the opposite of everything he is. I believe there's a line actually in the, was it the Charles Lawton version, where he basically says, "I never truly realized how ugly I am until I saw you." So everything he does is ultimately to help her, and the fact that he doesn't ultimately wind up with her at the end, much to a lot of people's disappointment, depending on the adaptation, that's meant to be seen as kind of a tragic thing, because we know he's a good guy, we know he deserves love, and yet he never gets it. That is his tragedy, and we feel for him. That's the point I'm getting across. What about Medusa? Well, that depends on the interpretation of the myth. In the oldest interpretation, they don't specifically say that Medusa was taken advantage of. That part became canon in later interpretations, especially as the myth started to get filtered through feminist lenses, where people were looking and saying, wait a minute, why did she take the blame when Poseidon was the one who entered her temple and then entered her temple? You know, I have to be careful what I say on YouTube, especially if I am running a family-friendly channel. The point is, Medusa is an example of an ugly female character who kind of has been put through so many different interpretations at this point that you gotta wonder where she even fits on the spectrum anymore. But she is one of the few examples out there. Not that there are none. Let us not forget that there are plenty of romance novels where the protagonist is Jane plain and tall. Not necessarily ugly, but a character who isn't going to turn any heads, always a bridesmaid, never a bride, but she finally finds the man of her dreams. I mean, that's the general idea. I mean, I don't really read that many romance novels, but that's what I picked up on. But more recently, there's been a push for body acceptance and body positivity and fat acceptance, and basically just a push for people to not be forced to aspire to impossible bodies, or at least what's called impossible bodies. Now, look, I want to make something very clear. I don't think that anyone should certainly be shamed for being overweight or not being conventionally attractive or anything of the sort. Real people certainly, I mean, reality is not fiction. But it is in the realm of fiction that there has been a push for more unattractive characters to show up, particularly with women. Most recently, there was that one Dove commercial where they said that they're going to push for body positivity in video games of all things. Because, you know, when you think of Dove soap, you think of video games. It's the natural through line. Just like when I think of potatoes, I think of the space program that will take us to Alpha Centauri one day. If you don't understand the connection, that's your problem. So what exactly is going on here? Why the pushback against this specifically? Well, I mean, I'm not the first person to point out that people like looking at that which is aesthetically pleasing, whether it is an object or it's a person. And when it comes to something like comic books or video games or something, we like looking at protagonists who are attractive. Whether it's because we are aspiring to be like them or because we just like the way they look, I mean, that's just the way it's been for centuries. Always there are exceptions, yes, but there's a general rule about that. So why the pushback? I keep coming back to that question. And what does it have to do with my book? Well, here's where we get into the meat of it. A permutation of this argument also popped up regarding the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that Seth Rogen is making, where April O'Neil was redesigned to be heavyset as well. Now, I haven't seen that movie, and I don't actually plan on seeing it because I already saw one example of what Seth Rogen does to green superheroes, and I'm not going to indulge him again. But I have seen that Dove commercial. At this point, who hasn't? So let's break that down for a moment and see if we can figure out what's going on with it. So what's the commercial about? We see the filming of a video game cutscene, specifically an end screen where you win the level, and the player character strikes a pose. The scene ends filming, the character walks off set and into her dressing room, and we see her removing her armor, and we find out that her armor was just compressing her body, whereas she looked not thin, but certainly physically fit in the video game cutscene. In real life, she is incredibly round. One might even say she's obese. Where all of that fat goes when the armor is on, don't ask me. I mean, she is a cartoon character, but either way, once the armor is off, we see what she really looks like. And she has a moment in her dressing room where she's looking around at all the merchandise of her idealized self that everybody loves. She looks at herself in the mirror, and then she makes a decision. She grabs her equipment and a few bits of armor, goes out the door, and now she's filming that final video game scene as her authentic self, without the armor, letting it all hang out, specifically her girth. I mean, we can't show too much. It is a commercial meant to be seen on, like, TV and whatnot. So, based on that, what can you tell me about this character? That is a genuine question. What is this character's personality? Who is she? One thing we know about her is that she is fat. Let's not mince words here. She's fat. And that she doesn't like having to compress her body to look more physically fit. Okay, that's one thing we know. But what else? Is there even anything else? I don't think there is. Yes, we only spend 30 seconds in the spot, I mean, not even the full 30 seconds, following this character. So there's not that much time that we can learn something about her, but at the same time, this commercial is telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we are supposed to feel something. We're supposed to see a character start in one place, end in another, and we're supposed to be on her side. But why? Other than the fact that she is not thin or not fit. Is there anything? Anything at all? Based on the number of times I've seen that commercial, which is quite a few, I can't determine anything. We are meant to side with this character because she is fat. We are meant to respect her decision because she's fat. And we are meant to feel good about where she winds up at the end, embracing her true self because she's fat. That is her character. Her character is fat person. That's it. We don't know if she is amiable. We don't know if she's easy to work with. We don't really know anything else about her, yet we're still supposed to be rooting for her based on a superficial detail. Therein lies the problem. And it's only confirmed when the rest of the commercial plays out with text giving us a statistic that is never cited, which is one of the most dubious things you can do when putting forward a statistic. And then the message that Dove is going to be working to intentionally make a change in a department where they basically have no business even being, as part of a socio-political movement. There you have it. That's the reason that this quote-unquote character in this commercial doesn't have a personality beyond I am fat. It's because she exists to push an agenda. That is it. It's the agenda that matters. Her personality, who she is, that doesn't matter, hence why it's not in the commercial. Hence why we don't even get a hint of it, really. The only thing that matters is that she's fat and not conventionally attractive, and you need to accept that for who she is, or else you're the problem. That's what people are rejecting. And it's just the latest permutation of a problem that's been plaguing all kinds of media, whether it's advertisement or entertainment. We're meant to side with a particular character and want to root for them and see them succeed because of some sort of superficial detail, as opposed to giving us a reason why we should like this person. The most recent example that I've personally experienced is in the Skull Island animated series on Netflix with the character of Annie. We are meant to like her because she is the cool as ice girl boss who can fight monsters and never loses a fight, and she can do no wrong, and everyone else says she's so cool and competent. But do we have an actual reason to like her as a person? Well, she's kind of a brat, really. She's very self-centered. She treats the people around her like dirt. She expects all the sympathy for herself and never spares any for others. She doesn't care about what other people think until their opinion of her dips below calling her perfect, at which point then the gloves come off. But we're still meant to think that she is the best character, and her face is what's plastered all over the advertisements on Netflix. So clearly they want us to like her because girl boss. Even though a lot of people, myself included, don't like her because she's a narcissistic a-hole. Do you see what's going on? Compare those examples to Quasimodo. Quasimodo, I could tell you more about what kind of person he is beneath that hideous exterior. But with characters like Annie or the Dove Woman, they basically only have one superficial detail about them, which the people behind those characters assume is going to win us over, because why wouldn't it? They're championing the right cause after all. But we don't, because they forgot to make them likable. And yet I also wrote such a character who's not conventionally attractive. Might have been at some point, but see her walking towards you these days, you might accidentally mistake her for a zombie. And yet, at least as of this video's posting, you're not going to see anyone slamming that book for me trying to push an agenda about body positivity, because I don't do that in the book. In fact, a lot of people really like the character of Emerald, and they like the way she plays off of other characters in the book. So how did I manage to pull that off? How did I make a character who is not conventionally attractive, but also is enjoyed by people? And a female character, no less. I'll let you in on my process when coming up with this story. So first of all, I knew I wanted to tell a story with a female protagonist. I'd written plenty of ensemble stories with a mix of male and female characters, but I wanted a female protagonist at the core of at least one story. I also decided to set the story in the 1940s specifically because that was a time when women were filling in more roles that were conventionally assigned to men. Why? Because all the men were off fighting in World War II. So in order to keep the country running, the women had to step up and be the mechanics or the cab drivers or things like that. You get the idea. Now granted, Emerald is a gumshoe, and she's in a setting that's very unconventional because it is an urban fantasy, so that particular aspect didn't quite make its way into the final product, but it was one of the motivating ideas for why I set the story when I did. I also decided that I didn't want a character who was going to be that physical. As I was looking through my different stories, whether they were published or they have yet to be published, I noticed that I had quite a few of them, at least in those current states, where the characters were action-oriented. They solved problems with their fists and their superpowers if they had any, or with whatever weapons they had on hand. And I didn't necessarily want to write another character like that. I wanted a character who might be a bit more cerebral, a character who might try to think or talk her way out of a situation. And in order to make absolutely sure I didn't fall into the trap, I made it so that she couldn't fight. That is why she is so physically infirmed. This'll sound terrible, but I intentionally crippled her. That's the most blunt way of putting it. If she cannot physically fight, she has no choice but to go and be more cerebral, if you will. However, that also naturally leads to the question of how does she navigate the world, especially in the 1940s, if she is that infirmed? So while the choice was made specifically to close one door, it opened others. But here's the really important part. After I established all that stuff I wanted to do with Emerald, I devoted a lot of time to crafting her personality. I didn't just stop it at, oh, she walks with a limp and a cane and can't really move. I wanted her to actually have substance. Seriously, I devoted a lot of time to crafting Emerald, figuring out what her past was like, how she views herself now that she is in this infirmed state, whether or not she lets that stop her, how she goes about certain other things, how it may have had some permanent effects that lead to her making decisions that might be controversial, what other kind of hang-ups she might have, whether she is more of a virtuous character, more of a flawed character, or if the virtues and flaws keep balancing each other out and, like, you're never quite sure where she stands. How she interacts with other characters, why she interacts with other characters, how she uses this special ability that she has thanks to that blackened left eye I mentioned, and how that power affects the way people see her. All of these elements, which I'm not going to give away because I want you to read the book if you haven't already, those are the things that make Emerald a character who you may not always like in the moment, but hopefully you come away from the story liking her in general, as well as the other characters. You're supposed to feel that way about all of them. And based on the reviews the story has gotten, I mean, I'm not usually one to toot my own horn, but then again, those reviews weren't written by me. Seems to have worked. You see what's going on here? Whereas characters that are based around an agenda tend to either have no personalities or have personalities that don't appeal to people. Emerald and Quasimodo and other classically not conventionally attractive characters have personalities that are well fleshed out, well-rounded, endearing. Therein lies the trick. Listen, storytellers can make a character look however they want, in whatever medium they want. You can have them be attractive, you can have them be unattractive. But their physical appearance, while it might be important, isn't the thing that's going to matter the most. What's going to matter the most is who the character is. That's the thing. And that's what so many modern stories, especially ones that are fueled by agenda rather than a desire to entertain, are missing. They're missing those personalities. Or at the very least, they're missing endearing personalities. And instead thinking that because of some superficial detail, they can make any character with a personality as despicable as possible, and it shouldn't matter. But it does matter. The way people respond to these things, it very clearly matters to a lot of people. Ultimately, it is the characters with the strongest personalities that endure. And that's the point I want to put forward here. It doesn't matter what your character looks like. Your character can look like anything. It could look like a spider that was born in an outhouse when the lightning struck, for all that it matters. But if that spider that was born in the outhouse when the lightning struck has an endearing personality to it, even people with arachnophobia will be hard-pressed not to find something endearing about it. I mean, maybe. But that's ultimately the point. It's something I keep coming back to. Personality of the characters. Making a well-rounded character, that is one of the most important things you can have in a story, regardless of what they look like. And that's where I want to leave this particular little video. Hopefully, this provided some interesting insights for you. Or if you have some of your own, leave them down below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.